Good evening. I am Fumio Nanjo, Special Advisor to the Mori Art Museum. This year's ICF is going to be talking about the pandemic and innovative city, taking into account COVID-19 and the impact it has left to the broad world. And therefore, it has been started from the 16th of this month, and it will go on until the 27th. The art and science session consists of three things: understanding the reality, empathizing, and creating in collaboration with others, and how COVID-19 has changed the way we communicate. We are on the fifth day of art and science. New conditions for cities and architecture. Collaborative creativity is the theme. We're having a lot of discussions as to how COVID-19 will change the world. And today we want to have discussions as to how and in what way COVID-19 will impact us. And every day we have different moderators. And today, for the collaborative creativity first session, we have Mr. George Kunihiro, architect, who will be moderating the session.
Good evening. Good morning. Good afternoon, wherever you are around the world. I'm speaking from the 49th floor of this Mori building in the space of the Academy Hills, Tokyo. And my name is George Kunihiro, your moderator for the Art and Science Breakout session for the coming two evenings. And this evening, the theme of the session A5 is Designing New Lifestyles, Collaborative Creativity. And tomorrow we'll have the second breakout session, A6 of the Art and Science Breakout session, Designing New Lifestyles, Collaborative Creativity. In both sessions, the key words are collaborative creativity. And for our breakout session in the Art and Science session, we'll generate a discussion related to the main theme, which is the pandemic and the expansion of human perception, the world brought about by the fusion of the real and the virtual. The selection of the speakers, we focused on the three basic needs, the food of life, which is food, clothing, and shelter. And for tonight, we're in a session of the shelters. We have three architects for the Designing New Lifestyles, Collaborative Creativity. Now we'll focus on the changes in human interaction that COVID-19 crisis has brought about, exploring the variety of perspectives which the speakers bring to our session, for the questions of how people understand the reality and how people empathize one another, and what it means to create in collaboration with others. These questions are posed to both in their working environment and in the projects the speakers design and provide for their clients. Now we will consider the new possibilities offered to the human experience by the cities amid the accelerating proliferation of virtual spaces all over the place, as the way in which people interact with one another becoming increasingly diverse. Now, not long ago, we were introduced to the concept of co-working and shared workspace, where multiple number of corporate entities share various functions of office environment. Today, the corporate culture, including major companies, began to adopt the idea into their offices. And just as this shift has shaped the new work environment, with the COVID-19 forced another giant shift. So with that as a background, Let me introduce the three speakers for tonight. The first speaker is Tsuyoshi Tane of Atelier Tsuyoshitani Architects, based in Paris, but he's Japanese, who's been in Paris, based in Paris, with global practice. The second speaker is Tiantian of DNA Design and Architecture from Beijing, who was educated both in China and in the United States, has a practice in Beijing and working on projects all over the huge nation of People's Republic of China. And the third speaker is Bijoy Jain of Studio Mumbai, from Mumbai, who perfected his own unique methodology of collaboration in his practice and also works globally at his own pace. That is important. So now we'll start with Tsuyoshi Tane, Atelier Tsuyoshitani Architects, as the first speaker. Okay, Tane-san, please give us your presentation.
Thank you very much. So I'll just share screen. Thank you very much for the introduction, Kunihiro-san. So today I'd like to speak about the situation of today as the theme of the collaboration creativity. We are based in Paris among the young architects, around 30 people working every day. And the way in our situation that how we wanted to convey for today's discussion is the idea that had been sort of took more than 10 years to come up, this idea of archaeology of the future. And the image that you see, it's in New York. It's one of the greatest cities, probably made in 20th century as one of the greatest successful city in the world. And I love the city. But at the same time, after last, let's say, 50 or 60 years, and that the heart of the city has been greatly changed. So most of the large city, in the center of the city, because of the limited land, it gets taller and taller. At the same time, as you can see, there's also the phenomena that many of the people from countryside arrive into the city, so city gets wider and wider. And you can see it's hard to recognize that it may look like part of one of the city, but actually it's in Sao Paulo in Brazil. And at the same time, we can see this look like one of the eastern country, but actually the outer skirt of Shanghai. And this image that you can be recognized a little bit familiar, that it's kind of one of the part of the city in Paris. And you can see this corner part. It used to be having a large, let's say, modern building has been there, which has been demolished earlier than how other buildings look like being part of the identity of Paris. And that made me to really question, to start think about, because we've been educated as sort of modernization and modern think the good future. But this good future, it's been demolished earlier than the image of Paris. They made me to question, so what we are looking for our future. That made me back to this kind of base. The architect, we work on the place. So once to excavate the site, the idea of the archaeology to discover the deeper past and to look for the memory from the place. So this idea becomes sort of the base to start to think for the architecture in our practice. So before designing the project, we always try to do this kind of archaeological research to look for all the memories from the place and trying to think and discuss about what again, in our way of seeing our world, we have a much longer history and longer memory deeply buried in the place to come up with the idea of the project. Therefore, this memory is not belonging to the past, but actually memory is a driving force to create the future. This becomes sort of our base for the project to start. So today I'd like to just share the very brief idea of 5 projects that we've been worked on, or will be working also. So project, the first things is the memory field of the Estonian National Museum from 2006 to 2016. The project has been initiated at the international competition called for the, let's say, architect to design the sort of one of the first national projects in Estonia after the independence from the Soviet Union. The other side, there was a big, large airfield which has been built by Soviet Union at the airbase. In the competition, we just proposed to extend more ideological idea to have, let's say, the continuation of the airfield turn into the national identity as National Museum of Estonia. The building started to announce the large canopy and going down towards to meet infinitively to the airfield. The building is 72 meter wide and the length is 355 meter long, and to be together with the airfield. So the museum is not just built, actually extension from the even negative memory of the occupation, but turning into the future to continue. So when you're coming from the city, you see to pronounce the entrance for the museum. And it's buried into the large landscape. And then coming to the entrance, there's large public space, not only the exhibition. As you can see, the space has been hosted for as if public place for people to gather. The exhibition start for the collections, for the Estonian craft pieces, and then arriving to the back of the building, the roof becomes lower and then connected towards to the airfield. And this is the winter view. Another project which is more idea competition it was 2012 for calling the National Stadium Tokyo Olympic for 2020. The competition was initiated in 2012. It was the center of Tokyo, where used to be the sort of 1964, there was Olympic in Tokyo at the first time. So to rebuild this main stadium, to reconstruct for 2020 for Olympic in Tokyo. But actually the site used to be dedicated for the Meiji Empire. One place is called Meiji Jingu as a sort of internal, let's say, celebration for the Meiji Empire. At the site on the right, which was Meiji Jingu Gaien, which is sort of place to celebrate for his dedication for the sports and the culture. By looking at the site, we came up with this sort of idea from the Kofun as ancient monument, which has been built 3rd to the 7th century. As the idea came into sort of one of the largest events at the Olympic 20th century or 21st century, to combine with the largest construction in ancient culture in Japan to be into one, let's say, stadium. So the stadium is not longer the building, it's become sort of one large landscape or sort of urban intervention, as well as internally to host for the sports. Even though going up to the roof, you can see 360 degrees of, let's say, Tokyo view. Miraculously, our young architect trying to challenge large competition to be selected at the finals. And unfortunately, the Zaha Hadid won this competition. And sadly, it's been canceled. And now it's been waiting for the Tokyo Olympic. That's the situation of today. And the next project is one of the last projects we've been finished this year for the Hirosaki Contemporary Art Museum. This building used to be sort of old sake factory, has been abandoned for many years, and then waiting to be having a lost of the future. This local heritage as a historical element has been nearly abandoned, but to be renovated as a museum. So one way to renovate as sort of creating the new architecture together with old building, or to make an extension. But we took this idea more to continuation as way to go for the future. So instead of renovation or extension, we took this idea for continuation. To reinforce all the main structure in terms of the earthquake, as well as actually this building has been made for the first, let's say, apple cider factory in Japan, which was taken from the French, let's say, technique. So in order to manifest the cultural, let's say symbol, to change the roof, turn into the sort of cider golden roof. As well as this sort of, let's say, taking care of this kind of building after 100 years to make sure that everything to be, let's say, renovated well, as well as this sort of covered area from the concrete floor and also the stucco wall to be removed to excavate to rebuild the old, let's say, bricks. And even the concrete area turning to be more filled by the bricks in order to, let's say, transform into sort of the more additional bricks to continue the history. So this is for sort of completed, let's say, museum just being opened this July in Hirosaki. And this is the inside that it's kind of continuing at the gate, and also libraries, as well as the exhibition space. And a small project that I'd like to introduce in a small house in Tokyo called Todoroki House in Bari. By doing this kind of archaeological research at the base of our starting point, in a way the Todoroki is sort of Bari area, and then having a sort of the land which has been very wet on the ground level, but at the same time there's a lot of wind on the upper side. So we went to extreme idea to look for this kind of dry environment and the wet environment, to look for this kind of extreme environment for primitive houses as a base research, and took this sort of extreme environment as a condition to be able to put them together on top of each other based on this kind of Todoroki environment. So we came up with this sort of lot of collages to test sort of very primitive, but at the same time, it's kind of masterpieces, something we have never seen before. So that becomes sort of the final, the idea of the house. It's been built in the middle of Tokyo, but it doesn't look like in Tokyo. So even the life in Tokyo could have such a great life to be generating the environment in the living room, to excavate the ground 1 meter down, to collect all the earth to be back to the wall. And then when you go upper floor for the master bedroom, you are living in a sort of forest. Going to the kids' room, the window size gets smaller to control the wind and then to see the view of Tokyo. And then lastly, I'd like to just introduce to you latest project we are working in Shibuya, which is used to be the old Tamagawa River, which was made for lifeline for Edo. But today it's being filled by sort of urban generated like land as sort of being filled. Actually, it's been marked as the blue area for over 3.4 kilometers from the Satsudai, Satazuka, and Hatagaya to be connected. But today the situation, like this kind of almost green, let's say, passage, that the Shibuya wanted to have a high line sort of idea to be regenerated. So from this kind of almost 19th century to today, it's been totally changed the land to sort of layering for the historical, let's say, layer of the land, to came up this sort of idea that how we can transform to change this situation, that we propose to turn into the farming rather than just making highline. So this lifeline Tamaga River become the green road and turn into the farmland. So we've been started like this project from last year and to continuing to develop it. So the round, this kind of lifeline from the, let's say, water turn into the food as 21st century that we are trying to regenerate it in Shibuya. So it's going to be 2025 will be completed for entire, let's say, food line of the Shibuya Tamaga River. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tane-san, for your presentation. We'll go on to the second speaker. Will be Tiantian from DNA Design and Architecture. So the podium is yours, Tiantian.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about our Songyang story on Tokyo Innovative City Forum. I do think that a healthy future of our city will also incorporate a more balanced rural. So today I will be talking about the rural revitalizing projects and strategy we have been working in the past 7 years. Songyang County is located in the southwest of Zhejiang province, not too far away from Hangzhou city, 3 hours by car and 7 hours by car to Shanghai city. And it's in a mountain area. It's basically a valley surrounded by the mountains. And you'll see this is the urban county of 50,000 urban fabric and 190,000 in the villages in this valley and also in the mountain area. Like other rural regions, the Songyang County is also experiencing a kind of unbalanced urban and rural development in the past decades. With the young people moving to cities for better employment, working and living, many of the villages are left hollow with very low populations, mainly in elders, and most of the villages are in economic decline and didn't have the face for the village's future. So there's an urgent need to establish a new hope for these local communities. Since 2014, we have been collaborating with local communities and also local government by adapting architectural acupuncture as the healing treatment to look into the symptoms of these individual villages. With a minimal intervention approach, a public program is introduced to each village according to its heritage and context to serve the village and community, to restore the village, the rural identity, and also to open up for tourism and stimulate economic development. The first village project happened in Tiantian. This is a renovation of a cluster of abandoned villager farmers' houses by the village entrance. The renovation is done by the local villagers and using the traditional building and techniques. For example, the ram earth wall and also Tane and mortise wooden construction. And the whole project is to preserve the envelope of this cluster by preserving the maintaining the overall envelope of this traditional village with hundreds of years of history. And the interior has been reorganized into rooms for homestay business and also an open space that for artist studio. Later on, 2 years ago, and 3 years ago in the summer, and 2 young people returned from Hangzhou city back to their home village and set up this fabric dyeing studio. So after the construction of this project in 2015, the total population in the village has increased to over 160 in the past years. Next is a Hakka Indenture museum happening in the Shicang village, which is a typical Hakka village. The location of this museum is by the mountain, so to connect the village with the nature, with the mountain. Hakka, meaning the guest people, moved here. This community moved to across mountain from Fujian province around over 200 years ago and settled down in this region. And they have this, in this region, you will see a lot of stone construction buildings for houses and also for retaining walls for the river and the mountain rise terraces. So this project has also become the opportunity to restore a traditional long lost and building techniques, the masonry technique, and also to create a archaeological space contemplating the history of Hakka village and the indenture culture. The indenture collection in this village is actually the largest Hakka indenture collection in the whole country. And this rural Hakka Indenture Museum, as a rural museum, it also engages with light maintenance to invite people entering into the space and to have. And also, this project has inspired an investor from Shanghai to set up a rural homestay business next door. Brown sugar is a popular agricultural production from this Xing village. This is a flatland village, unlike the two previous villages. You will see that this is more kind of a modern look for contemporary villages. With the farmers, the villagers can build the modern houses. So in this village, it's not ranked as the traditional village by the Ministry of Housing and Construction from the government. But we do think that it still maintains very active agricultural activities, productions, and also lifestyle. So in this village, the brown sugar production has become the key element to introduce or restore this village heritage and identity. The factory, the sugar making process is it's a very vivid and striking performance. But of course, the condition was not fitting with the food production requirements standards. So a new factory staying away from the village to avoid fire risks and also interruption with the villagers' daily life has been programmed. The factory is taking the main production space as a central stage, and also to open up the surroundings to invite visitors to participate, to observe, and also the surrounding could become an open view to the farmlands and also the mountain. The cooking process is running for 24 hours during the winter season. So the space is full of this production and all the time in the winter season and 24 hours, day and night, 3 shifts of workers are working here. So this space, like I said, the space is conceived as a central stage for performance. So we also I bought these uniforms for the worker online, which is 16 RMB per set, and it works very well. And the color and the light, the steam and the light and the space, kind of become, and also of course the movement of these sugar cooking masters. That has been, all of these have been composed into a choreography. And it's almost like a celebration in the winter season for the Chinese New Year. Is to attract the visitors to take this as kind of a winter leisure event. And the sugar price has gone up for about 4 times in the past 3 years. So more and more farmers started to plant this sugar cane around the village for better income. And during the, well, this, if you see the pictures of the sugar cane, this has also changed the agricultural ecosystem around this village. And during the off-production season, space has also been used villager center for movie nights or for a theater for puppet show performance. The next project is a renovation of an abandoned bridge by adding a wooden lounge on top of the existing structure. That this lounge is following the existing bridge structural rhythm and stops at the center when the bridge becomes an enlarged platform. So this is converted into a pedestrian bridge or lounge bridge and space, public space, by 2 villages across. The 2 villages, it used to be 1 village back to 200 years ago, and eventually separated into 2 by the flood of the river. So this village, this new Shimen Bridge has become the kind of a reunion symbol of these 2 villages. And it's also used by the local communities as the weekend marketplace. With the old Wang village, it was the most glorious village in the whole region back to 400 years ago. But in the early 90s, when this area has been zoned as industrial district, surrounded, you will see the factories and chimneys surrounding this village. This village didn't have the kind of natural or scenic resources like the other villages have for the rural tourism development. So in this case, the key strategy is to restore the pride and honor of this ancient village by setting up this ancestors memorial hall in the center, in the heart of the village, facing the ancestors hall. This is addressed to the ancestor Wang Jing, who was a imperial scholar back in the Ming Dynasty, and also the chief editor for Yongle Encyclopedia about 700 years ago. So this memorial hall is in the heart of the village, and is organized following the village fabric. And we also turn these 17 structural corners into the memorial corners, memorial columns, and also corners with the concrete bearing walls to create a corner embracing a stone carving that is produced by the one of the factories surrounding this village. And this space has become a memorial hall dedicated to the ancestor Wang Jin. But with this corner memorial corners, it also frees up the central space to accommodate different activities as a village center. And again, it also engages with easy maintenance. Villagers can easily just walk in without any checking points or clothes checking or bag checking counter or buying tickets. It's open to public, open to the villagers, and it could also be used just as a summer pavilion, like a lounge for people to visit and to stay. And next project is a simple exercise in the bamboo forest. Instead of a construction of a bamboo structure or material, we take the live bamboo and weave them into an open space in the nature. And here you can, the space can just be left open, or you can also reserve the traditional opera performance in this open space in the nature. And we think this is a metabolism architecture because it has the elements of a strong foundation and the bamboo as the structure and also as the building material. And every 2 years, you can replace, the villagers can easily replace the dead bamboo and add in the new bamboos. So it's a growing piece of architecture or structure. In the whole strategy is that architecture can become a language or a means to translate the unique character of each village, each rural locations. So together, the acupuncture has become a mapping system in the whole region. These are the projects we have been working with in the past 7 years, and over 24 projects. We have new projects coming along, and in a way, this has become a mapping system documenting or revitalizing the history, tradition, and heritage across the whole county. And in last 3 years, the county population has increased over 5,000, nearly 6,000, mostly in the rural villages, and also setting up their rural or new businesses, or becoming the connection between urban and rural with their knowledges and experience from the cities. Next project, I would like to introduce a villager co-op housing in Shantian village. Unlike the situation in major cities, the villages, in most of the villages, there are always a lot of vacant houses, villagers' houses, because of the low population. And the history of Shantian village in Songyang County can be traced back to 600 years ago. As an ancient traditional village, it retains the traditional village form, and of course, gradually become a hollow village with many vacant houses. So the village transformation project takes 2 parts: preserving the traditional context and establishing a new economic operation of co-op house stay business with vacant village houses.
Tiantian, time is running. Can you wrap it up, please?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you.
So the construction is made mainly by the renovation of our local traditions and also the original spaces, but it also engages the villagers into a new hybrid collective economic entity. So we read through the text, and for the 3 villager unions, either by housing or by their farmland or equity, and also the village collective community and town company and county-owned company. So this project has also provided a new alternative living or lifestyle for people, residents in our cities. Especially during this pandemic, many people visited this area, not only the village, Songyang County in general, for a closer connection with the nature. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tiantian. We have the third speaker from India, from Mumbai, Bijoy Jain of Studio Mumbai. And again, I'd like to remind you, it's 15 minutes so that we can have some discussions afterwards, okay? Thank you.
Share the slideshow now. Greetings to everyone, all of in different parts of the globe. I want to share more the ethos of the moment that we're in. So I've put together a sort of a group of pictures and text that best evokes or provokes, I guess, this very interesting time that we're in. So I'll read the first text that we have written. Civilization is built on an aqueous footing, a world that is in a constant flux, a culture continually in an ebb and flow. Air, light, and water is our essential construct. Man in nature, and nature in man is indivisible. The physical world that we inhabit is a palimpsest of our cultural evolution. Immediacy of material and immediacy of actions, of doing and undoing, is a way to negotiate uncertainty. Spontaneity allows us to be agile and adaptable to circumstances beyond our control. Temporality, then, is not consequential but intentional and can absorb disbalance. There are moments of epiphany, however fleeting, in the space in between. Our notion of the world is formed through continual engagements with diverse landscapes. We traverse these terrains physically and metaphorically to continually expand our world, discovering phenomena which are discretely present but non-extant in our collective consciousness. A repository of tacit knowledge, a haptic resonating energy field made from water, air, and light. I bring this, for me, what's important in terms of materiality, and I want to talk about it in terms of architecture, but the idea of an anthropological condition in terms of an ontological evolutionary idea that has sort of traversed through time. So here's a slide that shows, there's this idea of this body of water. Actually, this is the Ganges, in the north of India. And this sort of foundation or this sort of architecture that's rising or maybe going down into the water, there's a sort of moment of suspension. And for me, what's particularly interesting with this image is this idea of dimension or scale, or proportion, this idea of like the Da Vinci man, with the arms stretched out. But we also have very similar sort of symbolic references with represented in the Nataraj, which sort of shows a sort of diagonal movement of the Earth's axis. The viewer, the gaze of both the child and the other man, suspended on that architecture, sort of. So for me, it sort of evokes the quality of the text that I read. This sort of idea of an architecture or a landscape or a foundation that's emerging and disappearing both at the same time. I think this is very important, this particular word, and very particular specifically to the sort of time we're in. I'm going to read that. From Latin, palimpsestus, and Greek, meaning scraped again. A palimpsest is a parchment or other writing material whence the original writing has been effaced or partially erased, and then overwritten by another. In other words, a palimpsest is a multi-layered record. The nature of palimpsest is twofold. It preserves the distinctness of individual texts while exposing the contamination of one by the other. Therefore, even though the process of layering, which creates a palimpsest, was born out of a need to erase and destroy previous text, the reemergence of those destroyed texts renders a structure that privileges heterogeneity and diversity. This is very interesting, the last paragraph. In comparing the palimpsest with human memory, De Quincey emphasizes its propensity to preserve over its intention to destroy. Palimpsest, therefore, presents a utopian possibility of eternal preservation. And I've intentionally used the slide or the images on the right. I call the gentleman on the yellow, in the yellow t-shirt, Pocket Man. It's in the northern western part of India in Rajasthan. And I was buying these forks, these agrarian sort of pieces of equipment. And then I was exchanging money with him. And I was asking him, how come you're the only one dressed in a yellow t-shirt? You can see his relatives. The gentleman on the left side is sort of his white linen cotton, which is very typical of the region. And he says, well, these people come and give these t-shirts out for free. They're salesmen, advertising Coca-Cola or whatever, building materials. And then I was exchanging money and he put his hand in his pocket. And the next thing I knew, he sort of pulled the money out. And I said, wow, how did you do this? And then he goes on to say that I took my t-shirt home and my wife cut the t-shirt and she stitched this beautiful satin-lined pocket. For me, what's interesting is this idea of, this moment where both these cultures sort of coexist, even in this sort of Lucio Fontana cut, this idea of another space behind. So so for me, what's interesting is this idea of where seemingly there is no space, when there's no prejudice, there is a possibility of another space opening up. And the idea that potentially both these can coexist. And this is another interesting slide because you can see the sort of palimpsest. There's a cooking, which was very traditional of that region, which is to the left. It uses cow dung, it uses the local materials, and at the same time you have the kitchen on the right, which is extremely something that has been that has come to us through the colonizations that have taken place. But for me, what's interesting is the space that allows both of them to be there together in some sort of balance and disbalance, this idea of a movement between cultures, between time. So for me, that's what is rendered in the architecture, the potential of what we can imbue or imbibe in a space based on this idea of, of a lack of prejudice. Manner, from French manière, some substantivized use of the adjective, meaning done with one's hands. A notion which reveals a method of execution or a way of doing, especially with regards to the outward manifestation of an embodied process. I think for me, it's not so much that I'm nostalgic about the hand or I'm, sentimental about the hand, but the potential of what the hand has as a way to communicate, things. That's the sort of, if you visualize the first communication that came to us, that when we came into being, that the day we were born was actually the palms of the hand that are drawing us out. That's when the first communication took place. So it's just sort of asking the idea of, the hand and a lack of a hand, in time, maybe will this sort of, what happens when these fall off, how would we be? What kind of, phenomena we would be, how do we then reclassify ourselves as humans or something in between? So anyway, it's just, again, not so much to show that this is the architecture or this is the landscape that I'm interested in. It's more to sort of provoke the possibilities of how, given all the different, exponential transmission, the acceleration that's taking place, with the AI, the digital medium, communication, and at the same time, there's a sort of lag. There's the whole, sort of lag that's taking place. So how do we find a space in between that we can meet? Again, this is a very recent photo. It was actually, it's on the internet, but this is, it was just maybe a month ago. There's a festival that takes place. And again, you can see the potential of how we can engage with the landscape, at what moment where, and again, it's not so much about artistic or architecture. I'm saying the possibility of human potential is what I'm interested in. And with that idea, that's what then we can do to sort of create these kind of environments. Posture, the word comes from the Latin verb ponere, which means to put or place. To observe this concept implies an implicit understanding of the carriage of the body as a whole, its approach, attitude, or the positioning of the arms and legs in relation to the object which is being manipulated. Again, for me, it's sort of this image here, not one from nostalgia, but the relationship that we have, man in nature, nature in man. And this idea of erosion, of I don't want to say being of destruction, but somewhere along the way, that maybe to reconnect to this idea of, who we fundamentally are, where we are connected from, and that being the origin of how we then are motivated to sort of make the environments we make. And again, just to think of this, young boy and this young sheep that is there, there's a relationship that's taking place. They're growing together. There's a time evolving together. And for me, that's important. What's shared in the space in between? They're actually on a camel traveling. So they're sort of a nomadic, partially nomadic people, again, in the northwest region of this country. But for me, it's more looking at the phenomena, the sort of cultural phenomena that exist in these constructions, exist in these in these movements that are still very present. Here, this is an image, where actually the enclosure itself is a sari. It's a sort of cloth that the women here wrap themselves. That's the sort of dress or rather that's the fabric or textile. But you can see that same textile that wraps them, is also holding these young children. So for me, it's just this idea of the envelope, the idea of, the carriage or the carriage of the body that's explained in the idea of posture. Affection. It is the ability to observe and to identify with another situation and or condition, and to then care for it and protect it in the hope to provide it with what it needs to be itself. I really like this picture. It was, again, a picture that one can find on the net. This happened, right now as we speak, the situation, I think, where we are all globally. And here where it's a village, in a part of India where the inside is turned outside. It's like the glove being turned inside out. And where the walls of this settlement or of this place has been turned, has been opened up. The school, that it now kind of exists outside. And it's a very, poignant picture of the potential of how we can reinvent the idea of how we occupy space. How do we interact with space? Again, for me, that's, these pictures show the potential of what one can do, at least for me, what one can do or what one can bring into what we do. Irreverie of a state or entity which has the character of a dream, but which is rooted in reality. And this was taken a year ago, actually, and it's an Urs Mela, which takes place in December. And it's the juxtaposition of, you can see this sort of, dimly lit lamp, this dimly lit space in the foreground, which is a shop selling wares. It's a sort of fair or a circus, and these sort of spinning pinwheels in the background. But just this idea of that moment between dream and reality. And in some ways, what we're going through, and that's why I call it an interesting time, because in this time, there is potential to recalibrate. I think, I don't want to say reinvent, but recalibrate our understanding of spatial relationships, and so that idea of dream and reality sort of both juxtaposed, equally or adjacent to each other. Angle of repose. It is a characteristic related to interparticulate friction or resistance to movement between particles. State of rest. And it's very particular. I like this idea because it's the point where the body as a whole is at its rest state, where gravity, when applied, it's absolutely in tune with gravity. And so these rocks, these are sort of Buddhist rocks that you see up in Ladakh, in the mountain regions of the Himalayas. And there are these, it's quite interesting. These rocks have been around since the 9th century, and they've just been collected through the river. And they there's a text, Om Mani Padme Hum, the idea of a sort of universal sound, the idea of the emergence, from the ground of a lotus or a jewel, So I think for me, just this idea of how these rocks are collected and that this, it still continues to be there in this landscape and still used as sort of ways that, how do I say, resonate energy or create energy fields that are sort of disseminated into the landscape. Gravity, the force that attracts a body towards the center of the earth or towards any other physical body having mass. And you can see this picture, it's a very poignant picture. There's the airport that you see on the right, and right next to that, there's a big settlement, all completely made by hand, using the materials of the land. And they're now going to be moved as we expand, as the country expands. So this sort of idea of gravity, flight, the idea of mass, opacity, and this sort of juxtaposition of one rising up and one coming down to the ground. And so I think for me, it's sort of these words or these sort of sentences sort of evoke, the possibility of the potential that we have in whatever the conditions may be. So this idea of the core and a constant, and that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bijoy. So we had a presentation from 3 architects, and as I listened to their talk, it comes to there's an underlying kind of commonality in the content of what they've talked about. From Tsuyoshi Tane, he talked about heritage or talked about memory. Memory would be his generator of his architecture. Then for Shantian, we see that she had been working in villages, and she talks about acupuncture, bringing some stimulations to these abandoned villages and whatnot. But it's about history and heritage. Then we hear this a very eloquent presentation by Bijoy about all. It's, if I may, you talk about timelessness. You talk about erased text, eternal presentation. You talk about man making things by hand. You talk about landscape. You talk about the ripples, and also sort of gravity, which is the natural phenomenon, the physical phenomenon of our planet Earth. And so here we're talking about post-COVID world, and we're talking about our state of being sort of isolated in space, so to speak. Yet time flies, time is running, and all of you are working from your studio in a remote area where there are construction projects. But it seems, listening to all of you, that the time-space phenomena just goes on, and you're aware of it, but you're not affected by this. I haven't heard about your specific talk or conversation about post-COVID, but this is how I read it, because you just go on. And I just like to go one by one. We have 15 minutes to ask you, with respect to your practice and with respect to the projects that you're working on, how does this COVID, post-COVID or COVID world affect you as an architect? Can I start with Tane-san?
Okay. I think probably this kind of situation that we are facing an unusual phenomenon, as probably building industry has been affected, and it may affect also long terms probably. But the France has been announced second time of the this lockdown, the confinement, and we had a lot of discussion that we just decided that let's work. Because we are architects, we cannot do it ourselves alone. Even we cannot go to work through the screen. We need the hands, we need the people. So we try to work as more workshop basis rather than stay to work in the habit of front of the computers or way how we used to work. So it was probably one way take it at a situation that, okay, we need to move on. As Bijoy-san said, this human potential, we have much more maybe things that we forgot. So what we can do, we try to increase what each of us can do. So this is where we are. And of course, the projects are affected, but then still, fortunately, it's keep ongoing all the projects that we've been working on. So this is how we are today.
Very good. But then I'd like to ask you the following question, because you talk about your method of design is through anthropology or memory of the place and of the people involved. In this period, just as a present, what do you think? How do you narrate this this moment in terms of your language, your vocabulary of memory, or your methodology of memory? How do you narrate, if you can talk about it with your language?
It took me sometimes to really face this situation for myself, what we have done it, and then more came up the idea of the memory and thinking archaeologically that we can believe strongly than before. Therefore, this modern society, even globalization, this idea of the space, it's always required for the consumption. But what we want to do is to make a place for people. The place is an invitation for people to come, and people are, let's say, waiting for this invitation. While the space, even the database, even you make an office space, the space is always giving this kind of production of the new consumption. Therefore, thinking archaeologically and then look for this memory, it becomes, let's say, what we can believe more than before.
Very good. Thank you. Now, we'd like to go to Tiantian and your view, especially when you have so many projects away from Beijing where your office is, and you have to communicate and you have to perhaps go to the site. Maybe in China right now is open and free to travel. But how has this COVID situation affected you? Because we like to learn more about what's happening in China, because not many bad news are coming from China. It's all good. It's like I don't hear any casualty, so to speak, from China. You guys are back to normal. So maybe you can tell us how your thought about this COVID situation.
I think in general it's doing okay on this side, and yeah, there have been in the recent 1 or 2 weeks there have been new cases happening here and there in some cities, let's say Tianjin city or Shanghai city. But yes, I think the whole society is doing has been very active in terms of taking precautions and also helping to confirm the cases. And I think the whole pandemic situation has made me feel even more that it has always been such a blessing for us to be able to work in the rural context. And in the past years, we've been able to work close with the nature, with the where, and in the rural area, you also have a strong sense of history of nature, agriculture. In June, a few months ago, the county of Songyang only had one confirmed case during the whole situation. And it just rebounds to its regular routine very soon, maybe since March or April. So in summer, when we were stuck in Beijing because of the rebound of the pandemic, and we were not able to leave the city, but looking through WeChat, we can receive our villages, and there's more work than we did in the city. And even now, we have to wear masks in walking in Beijing. But if we travel to Songyang County, people are free of facial masks. So I think, it's a good sign.
Very good. Nanjo-san has a question.
Yeah, I didn't really understand. Yeah, I didn't really understand, but I think you said that the population in the local city was increasing, and people wants to live in the local cities with nature, and because it's caused by COVID-19, or it's just a general tendency in China? And if so, you think that in the future, the shape of the city and the relation between local cities and big cities may change or not?
The people returning to Songyang County with around 6,000 people returning home, that happened in the past 3 years. That was calculated by the end of 2019. It was before the pandemic, and it was more about the rural revitalizing process happening in their hometown, in their home villages, and people seeing that there are also new opportunities back home, and that's why many people started to return home, and also. It was able to. The other thing is that they were able to, with the new business setting up back in the village, it was able to achieve more income than working in the cities. So that was the number or the situation before the pandemic. And during this pandemic, which make it almost a year, 2020. We didn't calculate the number yet. Maybe by the end of this year, we will have the new number. But so far as we have learned that many people, because of the economy, so the other situations, let's say people start to, and even those people who are not from the village area started to think about if I could relocate to the village, to the rural area, with infrastructure, with our highway system, roads. To every village has a road access and also internet facilities. So it was able to have a kind of a alternative life living in the rural villages.
Thank you. Now, Bijoy, your presentation is about timelessness, really, and man on Earth, but Earth itself exists. Very existential, kind of esoteric kind of presentation, which sort of, pandemic doesn't matter to you because life goes on. But in reality, you work with your collaborators, the craftsman and the man in yellow that you showed us, the T-shirt and all. Give me your take on this reality today.
So I would put it in another way. I would say that it's an aspect of time as an aspect of timelessness. So for me, my interest is in this idea of time and what that generates. So for me, I think the best way I can say it, I wouldn't say that one is affected or not affected. For me, it's a matter of how you recalibrate, readjust, and bring yourself back to the center. Because the forces. If you think about gravity, for me, gravity is the only egalitarian force upon us. It is, independent of boundaries, geographies, and it sort of is on the surface of the earth. So it's the only equanimous force to all of us. And how do we respond in this force? Today there will be COVID, tomorrow something else with climate change, water wars, whatever they might be. I'm not looking at it in the most extreme destructive situation, but I think there's a constant negotiation, a constant adjustment, and for me, this idea of agility comes into mind. It sort of brings to me this, I remember watching this documentary of a 90-year-old kendo master, in Japan, and he had the stick and he barely moved. I mean, he had his students sort of, wrapped around him, and they were, they themselves were like masters unto their own bride. And there this man was standing and he barely moved, he barely moved the stick. No one could actually enter into that field. And so for me, this idea of it's more a practice. It's not so much, it's more this idea of practice, no matter what the circumstances are. I think for me, what's interesting right now is, I'm actually interested in the fact that how does one build without actually even going to the site, because I think all of us, have been gifted with imagination, gifted with affection, gifted with this sort of, a sort of visceral sense of a relationship we have to one another, to the landscape. And I think this is one thing that is at the core. The only thing that is sustainable, or that can sustain us as an action is affection. That is something that will always allow for continuity. So for me, the interest lies in, being centered to these sort of evocations that are very present in us. Again, for me, I'm interested in there's a lag in communication, so while we speak, through Zoom today, the fact that I cannot access something physically somewhere else, I have to rely on the person that is physically out there and in some way allow, I think, how does one build trust? How does one build trust? Yeah. And somewhere in letting go of one's own rigidity, there is a possibility of trusting what the other person or the other individual or the other entity at a distance, thousands of kilometers. I'm right now working in France. I'm doing a project in Japan. Actually, it's something to do with tajimi and the clay, and I cannot physically be there anymore. So I have to rely on the people that are physically there, photographs that are passed on. And this idea that these are evoked because be it Japan, be it India, be it France, be it Italy, be it America, I think we're collected by similar or exacting phenomena. Clay in Japan is in terms of the phenomena of clay in India. The phenomena is the same. Likewise, the idea of clay in Europe, the phenomena of clay is exactly the same. So how do you, for me, my interest lies in how do you connect with the idea of phenomena? And, and we all have experiences, of phenomena, of that's why I use the word for me right now, this idea of haptic. We have not just the eyes, but we have the other senses that allow us to sort of construct a sort of spatial condition. Bijoy, and the power of...
We got time, 20 seconds left. We go on to the question period, but let's wrap up this session at this moment. Thank you, Thank you very much.